My family did not invite me to Christmas because trash stays outside, my brother said. I just nodded. So I returned the gifts, closed my wallet, and walked away. Weeks later, a lawyer called, and now my brother is going absolutely crazy. My name is Valerie. I am 34 years old, and for as long as I can possibly remember, I have been the invisible child in my family. I work as a supply chain manager for one of the largest retail corporate companies in the country. It is a highly demanding job that requires pristine logic, endless patience, and the daily ability to put out massive fires caused by other people's incompetence. Ironically, that was the exact role I had been forced to play in my own family for my entire adult life. I was the fixer. I was the wallet. I was the quiet foundation that held up the glittering facade of everyone else's supposed success. It was Christmas Eve. The snow was falling heavily across the streets of New York, thick and relentless, biting at my cheeks as I walked up the long, winding driveway to my mother's house. The wind howled around me, threatening to knock me off balance, but I kept my footing. My arms were completely full. I was carrying 6 beautifully wrapped boxes, each adorned with expensive silk ribbons. One of those boxes contained a designer cashmere scarf my mother, Sylvia, had been explicitly hinting at for the better part of 6 months. And tucked safely inside the inner breast pocket of my heavy winter coat was a thick, sealed white envelope. That envelope contained exactly $9,500 in crisp $100 bills. It was supposed to be the commercial office deposit for my older brother, Donovan. He was 37 years old, the undisputed golden child of the family, and allegedly a highly successful, independent commercial real estate broker. For months, he had been feeding my mother a story about expanding his business, claiming he just needed a little bit of liquid cash to secure a prime office location downtown. And as always, my mother had relentlessly guilt-tripped me into providing it. I finally reached the front porch, my breath freezing into white clouds in the frigid air. I shifted the boxes in my arms and knocked on the heavy wood. Through the large front window, I could see the golden, inviting glow of the fireplace crackling in the living room. I could see the magnificent Christmas tree, decorated flawlessly. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of Christmas carols and the clinking of glasses. It looked like a picture-perfect holiday advertisement. The heavy oak door finally swung open, but only a few inches. My mother, Sylvia, stood in the narrow gap. The warmth of the house immediately rushed out, brushing against my freezing face, but she did not open the door wide enough for me to step inside. She just stood there blocking the entrance. She was wearing a beautiful velvet dress I had bought her 2 years ago. Her eyes darted nervously from my face down to the stack of wrapped boxes in my arms, and then her gaze dropped lower, lingering directly on the breast pocket of my coat where she knew the envelope was kept. "We decided it would be best if you did not join us tonight," she said, her voice barely a whisper, not quite meeting my eyes. Before I could even process the absolute shock of her words, the door opened a little wider. Donovan appeared from the hallway behind her. He was holding a crystal glass of very expensive bourbon, wearing a designer sweater I had paid for last Christmas. He looked at me standing out there in the freezing cold. He looked at the heavy gifts in my arms. He looked at my red, frozen nose. And then he let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut right through the howling wind. "We are having a nice, sophisticated family evening," Valerie, Donovan said, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "Trash stays outside. Just hand over the deposit and go home." I stood there on the porch, completely frozen. The cold winter air had nothing to do with it. It was the sheer, breathtaking cruelty of his words. I waited for my mother to turn around and slap him. I waited for her to scold him, to tell him that he was completely out of line, to swing the door wide open and pull her daughter inside out of the storm. But she did nothing. Instead, Sylvia looked away from me entirely, her eyes still pointedly fixed on the pocket of my coat holding the cash. That was the exact moment the blindfold finally fell off my eyes. They were disgusted by my presence, but they were absolutely desperate for my wallet. They did not want a daughter. They did not want a sister. They did not want me at their table to share a meal or exchange smiles. They wanted an ATM machine that did not speak, did not have needs, and simply dispensed cash whenever they demanded it. I did not argue with them. I did not shed a single tear. I did not yell. I just nodded slowly, looking back and forth between the two of them. I turned my back to the warm, glowing house, walked carefully down the slippery, snowy driveway, and opened the trunk of my car. I placed the 6 beautiful gifts inside, shut the trunk firmly, and got into the driver's seat. I started the engine and watched the snow pile up on the windshield. They really thought I was just going to hand over nearly 10 grand and drive away like a good little servant. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I drove away from the house and headed into the dark, snowy streets of the city. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned completely white. For the first 2 or 3 miles, I felt absolutely nothing. My brain was just white noise. Then, a massive city snowplow truck suddenly swerved into my lane from a side street, its flashing yellow lights snapping me violently back to reality. I slammed on the brakes with both feet. The car skidded slightly on the icy road before coming to a jarring halt. I sat there in the middle of the empty, frozen road, my chest heaving up and down, realizing I had almost caused a massive, life-threatening accident over people who had just thrown me out of their home like actual garbage. The tears finally came then. They were not tears of sorrow, they were tears of hot, furious anger. But it was not just about tonight. Tonight was merely the grand finale. It was an entire lifetime of this treatment. My mind instantly became a museum of pain, playing back every single moment I had tried to buy my way into their hearts, hoping that my generosity would eventually earn their love. I remembered my 18th birthday with crystal clarity. I spent that entire evening working a grueling 12-hour night shift at a retail warehouse. I was hauling heavy boxes, scanning barcodes until my feet literally bled inside my cheap shoes, all just to pay for my community college classes because my parents claimed they could not afford to help me. The very next morning, exhausted and aching, I walked into the kitchen only to find my mother cheerfully handing Donovan the shiny keys to a brand new car. His grand achievement? He had managed to get a C- in his basic business class, and she felt he needed to be rewarded for his hard work. I remembered 3 years ago when I finally got promoted to regional supply chain manager. It was the biggest milestone of my career. I wanted to celebrate, so I took my mother and Donovan out to an incredibly fancy, expensive restaurant. I thought, for once, the evening would be about my hard work. Instead, Sylvia spent the entire 2-hour dinner talking nonstop about Donovan's supposed new real estate venture. I sat there in silence, listening to them boast. At the end of the night, I paid the $400 dinner bill while they enthusiastically toasted to his imaginary and proven success, barely even acknowledging my promotion. And I remembered the absolute worst thing Donovan had ever said to me. We were sitting in my mother's kitchen last Thanksgiving. I had gently hesitated when my mother demanded I pay for Donovan's upcoming family vacation to Florida. Donovan had leaned back in his chair, swirling his expensive wine glass, and sneered at me with pure disgust. "You are not married, Valerie. You have no kids. You are completely alone. What are you hoarding all that money for? You cannot take it to the grave. You might as well make yourself useful." I had nervously laughed it off back then to hide the sharp, stabbing pain in my chest. I genuinely thought that if I just helped him enough, if I just proved my worth, he would eventually respect me. I thought if I solved enough of my mother's constant financial panics, she would finally look at me with the same pride and adoration she reserved entirely for him. I pulled my car into a brightly lit, completely deserted gas station parking lot. The neon signs flickered above me, casting long shadows across the snow. The car's heater was blasting at maximum capacity, but I felt completely, utterly cold inside. I looked down at the thick white envelope sitting innocently on the passenger seat. $9,500. I had worked 80-hour weeks for that money. I had sacrificed my weekends, my sleep, my own vacations. A sudden, terrifying clarity washed over me in that lonely gas station. I wiped my wet face with the back of my hand. I was entirely done being the family bank. I was done buying temporary, fake affection. I was done being treated like trash. But how far was I truly willing to go to stop this toxic, parasitic cycle once and for all? I sat back in the driver's seat, the engine humming quietly against the winter storm outside. I picked up my phone and opened my mobile banking application. The screen illuminated the dark cabin of the car. My thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment. There, sitting right at the top of the pending transactions list, was an electronic transfer for $9,500, directed straight to Donovan's business account. It was scheduled to clear at midnight. I stared at it. I thought about the velvet dress my mother wore. I thought about Donovan's designer sweater. I pressed the cancel button. A small green checkmark appeared, confirming the transaction was permanently voided. But I realized that was not enough. I did not stop there. I navigated over to the credit card portal. 2 years ago, under immense pressure and guilt tripping from my mother, I had given Donovan an emergency credit card in my name. He had tearfully claimed he desperately needed it for sudden medical expenses for my 9-year-old niece, Hazel, or for urgent, catastrophic house repairs. I had always paid the bill without looking too closely, trusting my brother. Tonight, I pulled up the recent, detailed transaction history. I scrolled through the lines of data. There were absolutely no medical bills. There were no charges from plumbing companies or roofers. Instead, there was a glaring charge for $800 at a luxury casino hotel in Las Vegas. Right below that, there was a charge for $400 at a high-end steakhouse, $300 for a pair of designer sunglasses, $200 at a premium liquor store. He was not meeting important real estate clients. He was not protecting his daughter from medical ruin. He was actively funding a fake, lavish millionaire lifestyle entirely on my credit score and my hard work. My blood boiled. I clicked the red button that said Report Card Lost or Stolen. The app prompted me for confirmation. I selected the option to permanently freeze the account and decline any future charges. I sat back against the leather seat and started doing the horrible, depressing math in my head. The numbers made me feel physically sick to my stomach. $18,000 for his initial business startup capital 3 years ago that somehow mysteriously vanished without a single return on investment. For agonizing months of paying his $3,000 rent when he claimed the commercial market was down and he was on the verge of eviction. $12,000 for a supposed severe medical emergency for Hazel last year that he aggressively refused to show me the actual hospital bills for, claiming it was too traumatic to discuss. It took me less than 3 minutes sitting in that freezing parking lot to completely dismantle a financial pipeline that had severely drained my life savings for nearly a decade. For years, Donovan knew exactly how to manipulate the situation, turning his own personal failures and irresponsible spending into my urgent, moral responsibilities. Whenever I tried to stand my ground and say no, my mother would immediately call me, crying hysterically, telling me that family helps family and that I was being cruel and selfish for letting my brother drown. I picked up the white envelope from the passenger seat, opened the glove compartment, threw it inside, and locked it securely with my key. I put the car into drive and headed slowly back to my empty, quiet apartment. Tomorrow morning, I would return every single expensive gift currently sitting in the trunk. The designer cashmere scarf, the expensive imported toys, the luxury watches. I was permanently closing the Bank of Valerie. Before I tell you what happened the next morning when my brother realized his free ride was over, I want to ask you something. Please take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me the name of the city you are watching from. Every single comment helps this video reach more people. Thank you so much. What would Donovan do when he woke up to empty accounts and declined cards? The attack started at exactly 7 o'clock the next morning. I was still lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when my phone vibrated so aggressively it nearly rattled off the wooden nightstand. I reached over and picked it up. There were 22 missed calls and an absolute flood of text messages, all from Donovan. The notifications were still pouring in, lighting up the screen back to back, when the heavy, violent pounding suddenly started on my apartment door. "Valerie, open the damn door right now," Donovan screamed from the hallway. His heavy fists hammered against the thick wood, making the entire frame shake. I threw off the blankets, walked out of my bedroom, and tightened my robe around my waist. I did not unlock the deadbolt immediately. I slid the heavy, metal security chain firmly into place first, and only then did I crack the door open just a few inches. Donovan was standing right there in the hallway. His face was bright red, and he was sweating profusely despite the freezing winter weather outside. He was wearing the exact same cashmere sweater from the night before, but now it looked rumpled. His hair was a frantic mess, and his eyes were wide and wild with panic. He did not say Merry Christmas. He did not ask how I was doing after leaving me in the snow. "You canceled the wire transfer," he hissed, trying to aggressively push his weight against the door. The metal chain pulled tight, stopping him from barging in. "Are you completely crazy? I need that money today. The deal closes today, Valerie." I stood there, looking at him, feeling absolutely nothing but cold disgust. "You told me trash stays outside, Donovan. Why on earth would a piece of garbage like me fund your magnificent commercial real estate empire?" He slammed his open palm against the doorframe, furious that I was throwing his own words back at him. "Do not play stupid games with me, Valerie. The credit card is declining too. I tried to pay for something this morning and it said frozen. Unfreeze it right now." This is not funny. I kept my face completely blank. I reached behind my back and subtly pressed the record button on my phone, holding it out of his sight. "Why?" I asked calmly. "So you can buy more $800 steak dinners in Vegas while constantly claiming you are broke and on the verge of eviction?" His eyes widened in shock for a split second, realizing I had actually read the detailed statements. But his deep-rooted arrogance quickly took over his panic. "I am your older brother," he barked, pointing a finger through the crack in the door. "You owe me this. You have no husband. You have no kids to provide for. You are supposed to help the family when we need it." Before I could even formulate an answer to that ridiculous entitlement, he quickly pulled out his own phone and shoved the bright screen toward the gap in the door. He had called my 9-year-old niece, Hazel, on a FaceTime video call to use her as a prop. Hazel looked absolutely terrified. She was sitting on her bed, clutching a pink blanket to her chest, staring nervously at the camera. "Aunt Valerie," she whispered, her tiny voice trembling with fear. "Dad said you are trying to make us homeless. Dad said you are taking our house away. Are you going to put us on the street for Christmas?" My heart immediately shattered into a million pieces. He was actively using his own innocent daughter as an emotional hostage to extort money from me. I leaned close to the crack in the door, trying to keep my voice as gentle and steady as possible so I would not scare her further. "I love you very much, Hazel," I said softly. "Your dad and I are just having a minor disagreement about adult things. You are absolutely not going to be homeless. Everything is going to be okay." I pulled my phone out from behind my back and aimed it directly at Donovan's face. "Do not ever use that little girl to manipulate me again, you coward. All communication from now on will be strictly in writing." I slammed the door shut in his face and locked the deadbolt loudly. I slid down the wood to the cold floor, my hands shaking uncontrollably. How incredibly low could a father sink to get what he wanted? The silence inside my apartment only lasted for a few tense seconds before Donovan started violently kicking the bottom of the door with his heavy boots. The loud, aggressive thudding echoed down the entire hallway, loud enough to wake up the neighbors. "You think you can just walk away from this?" he screamed through the door, his voice suddenly cracking with a strange, frantic desperation that I had never, ever heard from him before. "You have absolutely no idea what you are doing, Valerie. When the bank comes to take my house, when Bridget packs up her bags and takes Hazel away from me, all of this is going to be your fault. You're destroying this family." I froze instantly on the floor. When the bank takes the house? My mind started racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. A canceled deposit of $9,500 for a supposed new office space would absolutely not trigger a bank foreclosure on a residential home. And Bridget leaving him? Taking their daughter away? Over a single canceled business deal? None of this made any logical sense. There was a massive, gaping financial hole in his story, and he had just accidentally exposed it in his blind panic. I stood up slowly and walked away from the front door. Let him kick. Let him scream like a toddler. Let the neighbors call building security on him. I walked straight to my home office, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. I went straight to Facebook. Donovan was already posting rapidly. He had uploaded a long, dramatic status playing the ultimate, tragic victim. It read, "It breaks my heart into pieces when toxic, selfish family members let a little bit of money completely change who they are. Sad to see someone abandon their own innocent niece on Christmas morning out of pure, bitter jealousy. Praying for healing and peace for my household today." Underneath that pathetic post, my mother, Sylvia, had immediately commented, "Family is everything. We will get through this dark time together, my strong son." I did not reply to them. I did not jump into the comments to defend my character. I knew significantly better than to argue with professional, lifelong manipulators in a public internet forum. Instead, I calmly used the snipping tool to take a high-resolution screenshot of the post. Then I took screenshots of every single unhinged text message he had sent me that morning. I logged back into my secure banking portal and downloaded every single wire transfer receipt, every canceled check, every single credit card statement from the last 4 entire years. I put them all into a meticulously organized, secure folder directly on my computer desktop. Then, I picked up my cell phone and dialed a number I had sincerely hoped I would never need to use for my own family. I called Nadine. Nadine was a sharp, brilliant, incredibly no-nonsense corporate lawyer who had previously helped my retail company navigate some very complex corporate contract disputes. "Nadine," I said the moment she answered her personal line. "I think my brother is currently hiding a massive financial fraud scheme, and I think my personal money and credit are deeply tangled up in it." Nadine listened quietly to my brief summary. She immediately told me to stay completely quiet, absolutely not to reply to any of his messages, and under no circumstances was I to send him or my mother a single dime. I hung up the phone, staring at my computer screen. I thought I was just cutting off an annoying financial leech. I had absolutely no idea I had just pulled the pin on a massive grenade that was sitting right in the middle of his living room. What exactly was Donovan hiding from his own wife? Thursday night, 4 days after the disastrous Christmas Eve incident, I was sitting on my couch watching the snow fall outside my window when my phone suddenly rang. The caller ID glowed brightly in the dark room, showing the name Bridget, my sister-in-law. I stared at the screen, hesitating. Was she calling to yell at me? Had Donovan spun some horrible web of lies, and now she was part of his flying monkey squad, sent to guilt-trip me into opening my wallet again to save their home? I took a very deep breath, bracing myself for a fight, and answered the call. "Valerie," Bridget gasped the second the line connected. She was hyperventilating, her voice a terrible mix of pure terror and absolute, bone-deep exhaustion. "Please, you have to tell me you did not send him the money for the office." "I have not sent him a single thing, Bridget," I replied, my voice steady and firm. "What is going on over there?" She started sobbing violently into the receiver. "The bank just sent a final default notice by certified mail today. They are starting the legal foreclosure proceedings next week. We are 6 months behind on the mortgage payments. Valerie, it is $24,000 in arrears." I sat down heavily, sinking into the cushions of the couch. 6 full months? I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. "Bridget, I personally wired Donovan $4,000 in October specifically to cover the mortgage because he cried to me, saying his real estate commissions were slow." The line went completely, terrifyingly silent for a long moment. "You did what?" Bridget whispered, the breath leaving her lungs. I immediately opened the secure folder on my laptop. I started reading the exact numbers aloud to her. $18,000 for his startup capital 3 years ago. $12,000 for the massive roof repair he claimed happened last spring. $9,000 for Hazel's emergency dental surgery last year. Bridget let out a guttural sound that was half scream, half agonized sob. "The roof was never broken, Valerie. And Hazel's dental work was 100% covered by my corporate health insurance plan. We did not pay a single dollar out of pocket for any of that. My blood ran entirely cold. He had completely fabricated catastrophic emergencies just to steal thousands of dollars from me. But Bridget was not finished dropping bombs. Valerie, do you want to know the real reason why you were left outside in the snow on Christmas Eve? My throat tightened so much it hurt to swallow. Why? There was no beautiful family dinner happening inside, Bridget said, her voice turning incredibly bitter and hollow. I was upstairs in the bedroom furiously packing my bags. I had just found a secret cell phone hidden inside the spare tire compartment of his car. He has been actively having an affair with another woman for over a year. He has been using a secret credit card I have never seen before to pay for her luxury hotels and dinners. The emergency card I gave him, I whispered, staring blindly at the wall. Yes, Bridget said, her voice cracking. He knew you were coming over with that massive envelope of cash. He knew if you came inside the house and saw all my bags packed by the door, the illusion would shatter, and I would tell you the absolute truth about his affairs and the money. So, he convinced your mother to block the door, take the cash, and get rid of you as fast as possible so his disgusting secret would not blow up in his face. I closed my eyes. The level of betrayal was so unbelievably deep it felt like a physical blow to my stomach. But the worst was yet to come. If you are shocked by what my brother did, wait until you hear what he and my mother tried to do next. Please take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me the name of the city you are watching from. Every single comment helps this video reach more people. Thank you so much. Now, are you ready to hear what Bridget found inside his locked desk drawer? Before hanging up, Bridget told me she was going to wait in absolute silence until Donovan fell completely asleep, then she was going to take a hammer, break the lock on his home office desk, and send me pictures of whatever financial nightmares she found inside. I stayed awake that entire night, pacing my apartment, staring at my phone. At exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, my phone buzzed. The pictures started coming through in a rapid barrage. I sat at my kitchen island and began reviewing them. They were horrifying photos of crumpled, unpaid invoices, bright red past due notices from various utility companies, and multiple payday loan agreements with insanely high, predatory interest rates. But then, as I swiped to the next photo, a specific legal document caught my eye. I zoomed in heavily on the glowing screen, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. It was a formal contract from a very shady, unregulated private lending firm. It was a high-risk loan. The principal amount printed in bold letters at the top of the page was $95,000. I read through the terrifying terms of the agreement. Donovan had obviously taken out this massive loan under the name of his fake shell company. But his personal credit was completely destroyed from years of gambling and unpaid bills. He desperately needed a guarantor. The lender required someone with a perfect credit score and a high, easily verifiable corporate income to secure that massive debt. I scrolled frantically down to the last page of the photographed contract. There, under the designated section explicitly labeled guarantor, was my printed name, Valerie. And right next to it, resting on the dotted line, was my signature. I completely stopped breathing. I stared at the screen. The signature looked incredibly like mine. The specific loops of the V, the slight, familiar slant of the letters. It was a very good, highly practiced forgery, probably carefully traced from an old birthday card or an old canceled check I had written him years ago. But I had never seen this document in my entire life. I had never spoken to a single representative of this lending company. I kept staring at the bright screen, unable to look away, and then my eyes slowly moved down to the bottom corner of the page. The lending company strictly required a witness signature to legally verify that the guarantor had signed the document in person and of their own free will. There, written in neat, painfully familiar cursive ink, was the signature of the witness. Sylvia. My own mother. The cell phone literally slipped from my trembling hands and bounced onto the kitchen counter. A violent wave of nausea hit me so incredibly hard I had to run to the bathroom and grip the edge of the sink. My mother. The woman who had given birth to me. The woman who had stood in the doorway on Christmas Eve, wearing the velvet dress I bought her, and looked at me like I was a piece of useless trash. She had actively sat down in a room with my brother and willingly watched him forge my name on a $95,000 mountain of debt. She had signed her own name to officially validate the lie. She was not just a weak, easily manipulated woman who enabled her golden child. She was a conscious, willing accomplice to a massive federal crime that could have completely destroyed my entire financial future. The deep, aching sadness I had carried around for 34 years evaporated entirely in that cold bathroom. It completely burned away, leaving behind absolutely nothing but a cold, hardened, calculated fury. They wanted to play dangerous, illegal games with my life? Fine. I walked back to the kitchen, picked up my phone from the counter, forwarded every single image Bridget had sent me directly to Nadine, my lawyer, and typed one single sentence. Destroy him. What kind of insane legal trap would Donovan try to set for me next? By Tuesday morning, the situation had escalated from a toxic family dispute into an all-out, highly aggressive legal war. Nadine called me and asked me to come into her downtown office immediately. When I sat down in the leather chair opposite her desk, she slid a thick, imposing white envelope across the polished mahogany conference table. It is from Preston, Donovan's lawyer, Nadine said, adjusting her glasses and looking at me with a perfectly calm expression. Your brother is attempting to go on the offensive. He thinks he can scare you into submission. I picked up the envelope and opened the letter. It was an official, heavily worded legal demand for immediate payment. Preston, acting on Donovan's behalf, outrageously claimed that I legally owed the family a staggering $150,000 in retroactive financial support. Attached to the absurd demand letter was a photocopy of a handwritten piece of paper, dated exactly 5 years ago. It stated that I, Valerie, fully acknowledged that my family had generously funded my college education and my early career, and in return for this supposed financial backing, I promised to financially support Donovan and my mother indefinitely. It had my flawlessly forged signature at the bottom of it. And once again, my mother's cursive signature was right there as the official witness. Preston's aggressive letter explicitly threatened that if I did not immediately resume paying Donovan's residential mortgage and clear the $95,000 private loan balance within 7 business days, they would officially take me to civil court for breach of contract and aggressively sue me for severe emotional distress. I looked up from the paper and stared at Nadine, completely bewildered by the sheer audacity. They did not pay a single cent for my college, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I worked terrible night shifts. I took out massive student loans that I paid off myself. This whole document is a complete hallucination. Nadine smiled. It was a very sharp, very dangerous smile. I know it is, Valerie. And Preston is about to learn a very painful, career-defining lesson about doing basic, fundamental background checks on his clients' ridiculous lies before sending out extortion letters. Later that afternoon, Nadine set up a formal 3-way conference call with Preston. I sat silently in the room, instructed not to speak, while Preston puffed up his chest over the speakerphone, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. My client has a legally binding, properly witnessed agreement, Preston boasted confidently, clearly thinking he had the upper hand. Your client is legally obligated to support her brother based on this contract. We are willing to settle this quietly, out of court, and avoid a messy public trial if she just pays off the private loan and catches up on the house mortgage today. Nadine did not even raise her voice by a single decibel. She simply leaned slightly into the speakerphone. Preston, I am currently looking at the date written on this so-called binding agreement. October 14th, 5 years ago. The document explicitly claims it was signed in person in New York City and witnessed in person by Sylvia. That is absolutely correct, Preston said smugly, taking the bait. Fascinating, Nadine replied smoothly, her tone turning into absolute steel. Because I currently have in my possession my client's verified flight records, hotel receipts, and corporate credit card statements from October 12th to October 18th of that exact year. Valerie was attending a mandatory corporate supply chain conference in Chicago. She was literally 1,000 miles away from New York on the exact day she supposedly signed this piece of paper in person. There was completely dead silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear Preston sweating through the phone. Nadine continued, refusing to give him a second to recover. If you proceed with this baseless demand for a single more second, Preston, I will personally hand over this fabricated document, along with the $95,000 forged loan application, directly to the district attorney's office for felony fraud, forgery, and extortion. Do you still want to talk about a settlement, counselor? Preston violently stammered, mumbled something completely incoherent about needing to consult his client regarding new information, and hung up the phone immediately. The pathetic extortion attempt was dead in the water. But Donovan was entirely out of options, and he was not done yet. How desperate would a completely cornered rat become when the walls closed in? Bridget sent me a text message asking to meet me in person at a small, incredibly quiet coffee shop downtown on Friday afternoon. I arrived 15 minutes early, secured a table in the very back corner, and ordered 2 black coffees. When she finally walked through the door, she looked like a walking ghost. She had deep, dark purple circles under her eyes, her clothes hung loosely on her frame, and she was tightly clutching a heavy manila folder to her chest like a shield. She sat down across from me, took a shaky breath, and slid the folder slowly across the table. I officially filed the divorce papers this morning, Bridget said, her voice shaking slightly but carrying a new, undeniable resolve. And my lawyer filed an emergency motion for full custody of Hazel. I nodded, feeling a massive surge of respect for her bravery. Inside the thick folder were copies of everything she had handed over to her divorce attorney. But there was one specific printed document resting right on top that made my blood boil all over again. It was a printed Excel spreadsheet. The file name printed clearly at the top read Q-sales. This is exactly how he kept track of his lies, Bridget explained, pointing a trembling finger at the endless rows of data. I scanned the document carefully. It was not a real estate sales ledger. It was a literal manipulation diary. He had listed every single secret debt, every payday loan, every credit card balance, and right next to them, the exact psychological strategy he planned to use to extort the money to pay for it. Next to my name, Valerie, he had meticulously typed, reliable but emotional. Use Hazel to pressure her. Claim severe medical emergencies. Cry if necessary. I moved my eyes down a few rows. Next to Sylvia's name, my own mother, he had written, easy to manipulate. Use her house equity if absolutely necessary. Guilt trip her constantly about being a bad mother to me. He did not love any of us. We were absolutely nothing but numbers on a cold spreadsheet to him. We were just financial resources to be systematically extracted, drained, and discarded when empty. Suddenly, the bell above the cafe door chimed aggressively. I looked up. Donovan was standing right there in the doorway. He looked entirely feral. His expensive jacket was torn at the shoulder, his eyes were bloodshot and manic, and he was breathing heavily, scanning the room. He spotted us in the back corner, marched aggressively over to the table, and slammed both his fists down hard on the wood, rattling the coffee cups and spilling dark liquid everywhere. You think you are so incredibly smart, do you? Donovan hissed, glaring violently at Bridget. You forgot to turn off the location tracking on Hazel's iPad inside your bag, you idiot. He reached out aggressively, trying to grab the manila folder right off the table. Give me that file. You are not taking my daughter away from me, Bridget. I moved significantly faster than him. I snatched the folder, put it safely on my lap, and calmly slid my cell phone directly into the center of the table, screen facing straight up. The red recording dot was blinking brightly, capturing everything. Sit down right now, Donovan, I said, my voice dangerously low and completely devoid of fear. Or I will call the police this exact second and have you arrested for public harassment and attempted assault. He stared at the blinking phone, then slowly looked at me. The aggressive, towering posture suddenly melted away, replaced entirely by a pathetic, desperate slump. He collapsed heavily into the empty chair across from us, burying his face deep in his shaking hands. "Valerie, please," he begged, his voice completely muffled by his palms. "You are actively destroying this entire family over a little joke I made on Christmas Eve. You have to stop doing this to me." "A little joke?" I asked, my voice rising slightly in pure, unadulterated disbelief. "Are we really going to play this game right now, Donovan? Let's see exactly how far your little joke goes." Would I finally break under his theatrical performance? I leaned forward across the coffee shop table, making absolutely sure the phone's microphone recorded every single word clearly. "A joke did not miraculously forge my exact signature on a $95,000 private loan contract, Donovan," I said, my words cutting through the tense air like broken glass. "A joke did not actively convince our mother to commit felony perjury by signing as a false witness. A joke did not steal thousands of dollars of my hard-earned savings to pay for your mistress's luxury hotel rooms in Vegas, while your incredibly loyal wife was sitting at home taking care of your child." He flinched violently at the word mistress. Bridget just turned her head and stared blankly out the cafe window, completely, wonderfully numb to his presence now. She was done. "I am incredibly sick, Valerie," he pleaded, looking up at me with tears streaming rapidly down his red face. "The constant gambling, the secret loans, the women. It is a terrible illness. I am going to get professional help. I promise you. But if you give those forged papers to the bank or the police, they will send me to federal prison. Please, Valerie. You promised Mom you would always take care of me." "I never, ever promised to fund a criminal enterprise," I replied coldly, not breaking eye contact. He reached frantically across the table, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled it away instantly. "Just give me $100,000, Valerie. That is absolutely all I need to fix this. I can pay off the dangerous guys from the private firm, settle the house mortgage with the bank, and start completely over. I swear to God I will pay you back every single cent. You have the money sitting in your accounts. Please save my life. You are the only one who can." I looked at the golden child. The man who had mercilessly mocked me my entire life. The man who confidently told me I was trash and that I had absolutely no place at the family table just over a week ago. Now he was practically begging on his knees, demanding my entire life savings to clean up a catastrophic disaster he had entirely created through his own greed and arrogance. I stood up from the table slowly and calmly buttoned my winter coat. "I do not gamble away my mortgage, Donovan. I do not cheat on my spouse. And I most certainly do not forge signatures to steal from my family," I said, looking down at his pathetic, crying face. "Do not ever ask me to pay for your rot ever again." I turned my attention to Bridget, ignoring him completely. "I will personally pay for your divorce lawyer, Bridget. Every single cent of the legal fees. I will make sure you and Hazel get absolutely everything you need to start a brand new, safe life far away from him. Call me later tonight. Valerie." Donovan screamed, jumping up and knocking his chair violently backward onto the floor. "If you walk out that door right now, Mom is going down with me. They will arrest her for the forged witness signature. You are actively sending your own mother to a prison cell." I stopped halfway to the door. I looked back at him over my shoulder, feeling absolutely, wonderfully nothing. Then she really should have thought about the legal consequences before she willingly chose her favorite criminal son over the law, I said loudly enough for the entire cafe to hear. I pushed the glass door open and walked out into the freezing cold air. The crushing weight of 34 years of family guilt finally lifted completely off my shoulders. But what exactly happened to the empire of lies he built? The complete collapse of Donovan's life was incredibly swift and absolute. I did not actually have to lift a single finger to destroy him. I simply stopped being the human shield actively protecting him from the consequences of his own terrible actions. Nadine officially submitted the heavily forged loan documents to the private lender's legal team and the fraud division of the local police department. The exact moment the criminal investigation opened, Donovan's commercial real estate firm caught wind of it. They immediately ran a massive internal audit of his files and discovered he had been consistently forging client credit applications to illegally secure high-value commercial leases. He was fired on the spot, escorted out of the building by security, and permanently stripped of his broker's license. Without my constant stream of money to magically stall the bank, the foreclosure process went through rapidly. The beautiful suburban house was legally seized. Bridget and Hazel were given exactly 30 days to collect their personal belongings before the bank officially changed all the locks. Bridget immediately moved into a very comfortable, safe 2-bedroom apartment across town, entirely funded by my savings, while the ugly divorce and custody battle raged on in the courts. But by far, the most satisfying consequence of all was the frantic phone call I received from my mother. Sylvia called me early on a Tuesday morning, sobbing so hysterically I could barely understand her words. The police fraud department had officially contacted her regarding her illegal signature on the fraudulent loan contract. "Valerie, you have to call the bank and the police right now and drop all the charges," she wailed desperately through the phone. "Tell them you actually gave him verbal permission to sign for you. Tell them it was all just a giant family misunderstanding. I could go to a real jail, Valerie. A good, loving daughter would never put her own mother in prison." I sat there quietly, letting her cry and hyperventilate into the phone for a full minute before I finally spoke. "A good mother," I said quietly, my voice devoid of any sympathy, "would not actively help her adult son steal from her daughter. A good mother would not lock her daughter out in the freezing snow on Christmas Eve just to steal an envelope of cash. But I only did it to keep the family together." Sylvia cried out, refusing to take any accountability. "He was so desperate. You have so much money, Valerie, and he was struggling so hard." I closed my eyes tightly. Even right now, actively facing very real felony criminal charges, she was still fiercely defending him. She was still blaming me for being successful and excusing him for being a liar and a thief. "You did not want to keep the family together, Mom," I replied softly, accepting the final truth. "You just wanted to keep me useful to him. You made your choice very clearly that night at the front door. Now you and Donovan can face the music together." I hung up the phone and permanently blocked her number. Eventually, the private lender agreed to officially drop the criminal charges against my mother, but only in exchange for seizing the entire remaining equity in her own home to cover Donovan's massive unpaid debt. Sylvia lost more than half her life's retirement savings just to keep her precious, golden son out of a federal prison cell. Donovan was forced to move into her tiny spare bedroom. He was completely bankrupt, totally unemployed, and allowed only strictly supervised weekend visits with his daughter. They got exactly what they deserved, each other. 1 full year later. The snow was falling gently outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my brand-new penthouse apartment. I had finally used the money sitting in my bank account for myself. There were absolutely no more bailing out fake emergencies. There was no more desperately buying affection from people who hated me. The doorbell rang cheerfully. I opened it to find Bridget and Hazel standing there, beaming and holding a large box of homemade Christmas cookies. Hazel immediately ran into my arms, laughing brightly. The heavy, dark, anxious look she used to constantly carry around her father was completely gone. We sat comfortably around my small, beautifully decorated Christmas tree. There were absolutely no impossibly expensive designer gifts this year. There were no thick white envelopes filled with hard cash to hand over. We drank rich hot chocolate, watched silly holiday movies, and for the very first time in my entire adult life, I felt the genuine warmth of a real family. Donovan was not there. Sylvia was not there. And the most beautiful part of it all was that I did not miss them at all. People often think that walking away from your family is a loud, incredibly explosive event filled with screaming and drama. But for me, true freedom was completely, wonderfully quiet. It was the absolute peace of waking up in the morning and not frantically checking my bank account to see what new amount had been stolen. It was the profound quiet of finally knowing that my hard-earned success was entirely my own, and no one was ever going to punish me for it ever again. When Donovan confidently told me there was no place for losers at their table, I honestly thought my family was throwing me away to suffer. In reality, they were actually setting me completely free. They willingly handed me the exact key to my own cage. I never burned the old childhood photos. I keep them neatly in a drawer. I calmly acknowledge the brother I used to have when we were children, but I absolutely refuse to sacrifice a single second of my future for the monster he willingly chose to become. Money never bought their genuine love. It only bought their temporary silence, and it protected their endless lies. When I finally closed my wallet that night, I did not destroy the family. I just turned on the bright lights so everyone could finally see the rot that was already there. I opened the door to myself, and I have never, ever looked back. If you enjoyed this wild ride and want to hear more insane family drama, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. We have got fresh stories coming your way. See you in the next one.